morning, church. I'm hoping everyone is doing well. I want to address to you guys a specific topic that I'm seeing in society or with culture. It's going on a weekly basis, and that's the downcast soul. You see, God created you, God created me with a human soul. And the soul can experience, as some people call it, a cold. And this is what you call the dark night of the soul. And in our terms, it's depression or discouragement. So think about this. The discouragement or depression can happen from a high expectation of reality, a person setting expectations for themselves, but as they live to a day-to-day level of life, there's a low reality. So their real life is nowhere near of what they expected their life to be. This is the heart of discouragement. This is the heart of depression. And I want to bring up to you a character in the Bible whose name is Elijah. And I'm sure everyone knows who Elijah is. And there's a famous passage in 1 Kings chapter 18, and that's him on Mount Carmel. Now, Elijah faces 450 prophets of Baal, and he's victorious over them, shows that he is God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is the true God. And at the very end of the verse of 1 Kings chapter 18, it says, the hand of the Lord was upon him. And you'd expect Elijah to be on some high because his reality is so high. It's everything that he's praying for, everything he's asking God for, it happens. But the chapter after, all of a sudden, in chapter 19, he's suicidal. And you wonder, how is this possible? You see, in 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah prays his prayer to God that pretty much forgot to kill him. And it's a suicidal prayer, and we can see the soul, the state of where Elijah is, that he's depressed. How is it possible for someone to go on such a spiritual high all of a sudden to a low reality? And this is because discouragement, the dark night of the soul, depression reached the very heart of Elijah. And remember this, James chapter 5 verse 17 says, Elijah was like a man just like us. And sometimes when we read that, we're like, it's in the context of prayer. But remember this, if it can happen to Elijah, it can happen to me and it can happen to you. Okay? Now, depression. Depression always happens when someone is constantly thinking first about themselves. Their mind is always on themselves, and second, their mind is always on the negativity of themselves, what they don't have, instead of what they have. You see? If a person's mind is constantly about themselves and what they don't have, I guarantee you depression will come in, regardless if you know God or if you don't know God, regardless if you're Christian or you're non-Christian. It's possible to be a Christian and to be in ministry, to be serving God. But if your mind is still on you, depression will kick in just like Elijah. Was he serving God? Absolutely. But it came in. Now, God responds to Elijah's prayer in 3 ways. And I want to share with you guys 3 ways of how God responds to our prayers, or how God deals with the heart of depression. 3 ways of how God deals with the downcast soul. Now, the third thing that God does in response to Elijah's prayer is he provides for him relational nourishment. The first thing that God did is he responded to Elijah's prayer by giving him physical nourishment. The second thing he did is he responds by giving him spiritual nourishment. And the last thing he does is he responds by giving him relational nourishment. One thing is clear from the text is that Elijah had a very high expectation for the nation of Israel after Mount Carmel. He thought that there would be revival. He thought the kings of the nation of Israel would submit to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the opposite was true. There was no revival, and all of a sudden, Jezebel wanted to kill him. Instead of submitting to God, she responds and wants to kill Elijah. So now Elijah is running for his life. And he's all of a sudden in his own world, and he thinks that he's the only person, he's the only prophet left in the nation of Israel. Remember, we said that depression is always a result of you're always thinking of yourself. You're in your own bubble, you're in your own world, but you're always thinking of the negativities of yourself, what you don't have rather than what you do have, you see? Elijah's mindset was there. And God responds to this mindset, his prayer of suicide, his prayer of depression, by revealing to him that, hey, you're not the only one out there, Elijah. There are 7,000 other people that have not submitted, that have not bowed their knees to Baal out there. And it gives Elijah a different perspective as far as, hey, I'm not alone on this. There's other people out there. And not only that, God provides him with relational nourishment, a friend, Elisha. You see? In a depressed state, someone, again, they're in a state of depression. Their soul is so noisy. And the noise that they're hearing is complete darkness, the complete negativities about their own world. One thing that we can do in a state of depression is speak life into our own soul. We can read the scriptures, we can listen to sermons, and we can speak life, the truths about life, into our own situation, into our own world. But the problem is this. Sometimes we can be so discouraged, so depressed that we can't. We can't speak. We know truth, but we just can't communicate that into our own soul. But the beautiful thing about relational nourishment, the beautiful thing about community, having other Christ followers in your life and that know you personally, is they can see your situation, they can see your life, and they can speak life into you. You see? We might not be able to be at a state where we can speak life into ourselves, but other people may. Other people can. People that know you. And all of a sudden they look at your life and all of a sudden they say, hey, things aren't that bad. And they see things from a proper perspective. Because when you're depressed, you see life from a skewed, a dark perspective, a false perspective of reality. You see? Again, relational nourishment. The beautiful thing about it is people can speak life into you. The last place that you want to be is depressed and isolated. Because when you're depressed and isolated, you're left with your own dark soul. And your dark soul will constantly speak negativity and darkness. But what you do want to do, if you are in a depressed state, is be in biblical, godly community. Because other people can speak life into you and see your situation for what it truly is. You see that? How did God respond to Elijah's prayer? Physical nourishment, spiritual nourishment, and last, relational nourishment. I guarantee you, if we are doing all three of these things, depression will go downhill and we will see life for what it truly is, from the eyes, from the perspective of God. James chapter 5 says, Elijah was like a man just like us. You know what that means? Depression can happen as it happened to him, it can happen to me, and it can happen to you. It doesn't matter what state you're at with God, it doesn't matter what position you're at. It can happen to every single human being. But the thing is this, when you are in a state of the downcast soul, when you are in a state of depression, question is, what will you do? Will you take care of your physical well-being? Will you take care of your soul? And will you be in godly community, relational nourishment? I guarantee you, if we do all three of these things, our physical well-being, our spiritual well-being, and last, our relational well-being, if we take care of all three of those, we will have a different perspective of life. And the perspective that we will have is the way that God intended life to be. Depression will go downhill, depression will be ceased, discouragement will go downhill, and all of a sudden life will be inside of us. Life will start to happen where we see life the way God intended it to be. And this is what God wants for you. This is what God wants for me. This is what God wants for His church, to live this life through the perspective and lens of God. I hope you found this encouraging, and I hope you stay encouraged. God bless.